and they moved the money so quietly that not a single headline caught it. $1.14 trillion. That's not the national debt. That's not some Wall Street derivative nobody understands. That's what ordinary Americans owe on their credit cards right now, today, as you're watching this. And here's the part that should make your blood run cold. The average household carrying a balance owes almost $11,000, at an average interest rate of nearly 23%. You want to know what 23% interest on $11,000 looks like? It looks like 38 years of minimum payments. It looks like paying $27,000 for $10,000 worth of groceries and gas. That's not lending. That's financial imprisonment. Stop scrolling. I don't care what you were about to watch next. This is the video that changes how you understand your own money. Because what I'm about to walk you through isn't some theoretical maybe someday scenario. The data is screaming. The delinquencies are spiking. And there's a connection to China that nobody, and I mean nobody, in mainstream financial media is willing to draw on a whiteboard and show you. I will. Here's what happened. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York released their quarterly household debt report, and everyone in the media grabbed the headline number. Record credit card debt, over $1 trillion, consumers still spending. And then they moved on. Next story, back to politics. But we didn't move on, because buried deep in that report was a data point that made our entire research team stop what they were doing and start pulling threads. Credit card delinquencies, meaning payments that are 90 or more days late, surged to almost 9%. Now, 9% might not sound like a crisis to you, but the speed at which that number is climbing, the velocity of deterioration, that hasn't moved this fast since 2008, not 2020, not 2015, 2008, the year the global financial system nearly collapsed. We've been tracking this on this channel for 7 months, and 7 months ago I said on camera, the American consumer isn't strong. The American consumer is leveraged. There's a massive difference between spending money and having money, and the credit card data just proved everything we've been warning about. But that's just the surface. When we went deeper, into FDIC call reports, Federal Reserve consumer credit releases, Bureau of Labor Statistics wage data, and even Chinese manufacturing export filings, we found a pattern that connects all of it. A web that nobody in the financial media is assembling because it crosses too many lanes. It touches banking, geopolitics, monetary policy, and the daily life of every American household. 3 things you need to understand today. The credit bomb that's already detonating under the surface. The wage illusion that's making you feel okay while you're actually drowning. And the China connection, the deep secret that's about to pour gasoline on all of it. That third one is the reason I almost didn't publish this video. Almost. Let's start with what's actually happening with credit card debt in America, because the scale of this is something most people genuinely don't comprehend. $1.14 trillion, all-time record. And not just a record, we've broken the previous record 4 quarters in a row. Every single quarter for the past year has set a new all-time high. That's not a blip, that's not seasonal, that's a trajectory, and trajectories have destinations. Now the apologists, and there are always apologists when uncomfortable data shows up, will say, well, the economy is bigger now, there are more people, adjust for inflation and it's not that alarming. Fine, let's play that game. Even adjusted for inflation and population growth, per capita credit card debt is at its highest level since the months immediately preceding the 2008 financial crisis. We ran the numbers ourselves using the Fed's own data sets. The comparison is almost perfect. But here's what the apologists conveniently leave out every single time. In 2008, the average credit card interest rate was roughly 14%. Today it's nearly 23%. That means Americans aren't just borrowing more than they were before the last crisis, they're borrowing at almost double the cost. The interest burden alone has become a second rent payment for millions of households. Think about that. Millions of Americans are essentially paying rent to Visa and MasterCard on top of the rent they pay for the roof over their heads. Let me make this painfully concrete. You've got $10,000 on a credit card at 22%. You make the minimum payment every month like a responsible person. You never miss a payment. You never add another charge. It takes you 38 years to pay it off. You will hand over $27,000 in interest alone for $10,000 worth of stuff. That's not a financial product. That's a trap with a welcome mat. And the banks know this. They don't just know it. They're banking on it. Literally. JP Chase reported record credit card revenue last quarter. Record revenue. While delinquencies were spiking. Their customers are falling behind at the fastest rate in over a decade, and the bank is making more money than ever. Because late fees generate revenue. Penalty interest rates generate revenue. Over-limit fees generate revenue. Your financial distress is their most profitable product line. I'm not editorializing. I'm reading their earnings report back to you. And here's where this gets structural and stops being about individual behavior. The Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia published research showing that credit card delinquencies are rising fastest among two groups: borrowers between 18 and 29 years old and households earning under $45,000 a year. The youngest workers and the working class. These aren't people financing luxury vacations and designer handbags. This is groceries. This is the electric bill in August when it hits $300 because you live in Texas and your apartment doesn't have proper insulation. This is the copay at the doctor's office. This is putting gas in the car to get to work so you can earn the paycheck that doesn't cover the bills that are already on the credit card. That's not irresponsibility. That's arithmetic. When the cost of existing exceeds your income, the credit card becomes a lifeline. And when the lifeline has a 23% interest rate, the lifeline eventually becomes the thing that pulls you under. And for those of you watching this thinking, well, that's their problem and I'm doing fine, hold that thought. Because when enough consumers default on credit card debt, banks tighten lending across the board. Credit becomes harder and more expensive for everyone. Small businesses lose access to capital. Hiring slows. Consumer spending contracts. The economy weakens. Layoffs begin. And suddenly the problem that belonged to someone else is sitting in your living room. That is not a theory. That is the exact sequence from 2008, step by step. And the early chapters of that sequence are playing out right now. Comment below if you're carrying a credit card balance right now. No shame, no judgment. I want to hear real numbers from real people, because the Fed's data is abstract and aggregate. I want to know what's happening in your life. Your number matters more to me than their averages. Number 2. And this is the one that made me genuinely angry when we finished the analysis. Not concerned, not worried, angry. You've heard the talking points. Wages are rising. Unemployment is historically low. The labor market is resilient. The American consumer is strong. And every single one of those statements is technically accurate in the narrowest possible definition of the words. And every single one of them is functionally meaningless for the average American household. It is a mirage, a beautifully constructed statistical mirage designed to make you feel like things are fine while your purchasing power is being devoured. Here's what they leave out. Over the past 4 years, average hourly wages have risen approximately 20%. Sounds great in a headline. Now let me show you what happened on the other side of the ledger. Grocery prices up 25%, car insurance up 52%, homeowners insurance up 33%, rent up over 22% in most metropolitan areas, child care up 32%, health insurance premiums up 24%. You see the gap? Your paycheck grew by 20%, but every single essential category, the things you cannot choose not to buy, grew by 25 to 52%. That gap between what you earn and what your life costs, that's not a rounding error. That is the credit card crisis. That gap is the $1.14 trillion. American households are using Visa and MasterCard to bridge the distance between their paycheck and their life. And the bridge has a 23% toll. And here's the part that should make you question every inflation headline you've ever read. The government measures inflation using the Consumer Price Index, CPI. And the way CPI is calculated has been modified repeatedly over the past 4 decades in ways that systematically understate actual lived inflation. They use something called owner's equivalent rent instead of actual housing costs, which essentially asks homeowners, what do you think you could rent your house for, instead of measuring what people are actually paying. They apply hedonic adjustments, which means if your laptop got faster this year even though you paid more for it, the government can count that as a price decrease. They substitute. If steak gets too expensive and you switch to chicken, the index can replace steak with chicken and say prices didn't go up. You just eat worse now. If you measured inflation the way the Bureau of Labor Statistics measured it in 1980, their own previous methodology, not some conspiracy framework, their own former approach, real inflation has been running between 9 and 12% for the last 3 years. Not 3%, not the 4% that made headlines, 9 to 12. So when the Federal Reserve Chair stands at a podium and says inflation is moderating and the economy is resilient, I want you to ask yourself one question. Resilient for whom? Because if you're a family of four in Ohio or Georgia or Michigan, making $72,000 a year, and your real purchasing power has been cut by 15%, while your credit card balance has doubled, the word resilient feels like a slap in the face. And it should. Before I get to number 3, the China connection, which is going to fundamentally change how you understand this entire crisis, I need you to do something. Hit subscribe, right now. I can see the analytics in real time. More than half of you watching this video are not subscribed to this channel. You are consuming research that took our team over 40 hours to assemble, verify, and present. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for one button click so the algorithm pushes this to more people who need to hear it. People who are drowning in credit card debt right now and don't understand why. People who think they're doing something wrong when really the system is doing something wrong to them. One click. That's it. Do it now. Thank you. Now let's talk about China. Now, I need to set the table for this section carefully, because what I'm about to walk you through took us 3 weeks to verify. 3 weeks of cross-referencing Chinese customs data, U.S. Treasury international capital flow reports, Federal Reserve trade balance data, and Bank of International Settlements filings. This is not conspiracy. Every single data point I'm about to reference is publicly available. The reports are published by governments, both ours and theirs. The secret isn't that this information is hidden. The secret is that nobody is connecting the dots. Because connecting these dots crosses lanes. It touches consumer finance and geopolitics and monetary policy and trade economics simultaneously. And financial media is siloed. The person covering credit card debt is not the same person covering Chinese Treasury holdings, so nobody sees the full picture. Until now. China's economy is in serious trouble, and when I say serious, I mean the kind of trouble that changes global power dynamics for decades. Their property sector, which represents roughly 30% of their entire GDP, is in a state of rolling collapse. Evergrande, Country Garden, dozens of major developers defaulting on hundreds of billions in debt, apartment complexes that were sold to middle-class Chinese families sitting half-built and abandoned, ghost cities, real ones. You can see them on satellite imagery. Youth unemployment in China hit a number so catastrophic that the Chinese government literally stopped publishing the data. They just stopped reporting it. Let that sink in. When your doctor stops taking your blood pressure, it's not because you got healthier. It's because the number is so bad they don't want it on the chart. So what does China do when domestic demand collapses? What does any export-driven manufacturing economy do when its own people stop buying? They export, aggressively. They flood global markets with goods priced below cost to keep their factories running and their workers employed. Because unemployed workers in China don't just file for benefits, they protest. And the Chinese Communist Party fears mass unemployment more than almost anything else on earth. And here's where it hits your credit card statement. The flood of ultra-cheap Chinese goods pouring into America right now is unprecedented. Temu, which barely existed 2 years ago, is now one of the most downloaded shopping apps in the United States. Shein is selling clothes for $3. Amazon's marketplace is dominated by Chinese third-party sellers offering electronics, home goods, and gadgets at prices that seem impossible. Because they are. They're subsidized, either directly by the Chinese government through export rebates or indirectly through artificially suppressed labor and environmental costs. And American consumers are buying this stuff, compulsively, on credit cards, because when your real wages are falling behind your real costs, and someone offers you a dopamine hit for $4.99 with free shipping, you click buy. You click buy because it's the one thing you can still afford. And you put it on the card because the checking account is already spoken for. But here's the deep play. The part that should genuinely unsettle you. While China is flooding America with cheap consumer goods that Americans are financing with credit card debt they can't afford, China is simultaneously executing the largest sell-off of U.S. Treasury bonds by any foreign nation in modern history. Over the past 2 years, China has reduced its holdings of American government debt by over $300 billion. They are actively, methodically, and deliberately de-dollarizing their reserves. And what are they buying instead? Gold. Over 300 tons of gold added to their central bank reserves since 2022. They're building alternative payment systems with the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, and now a growing list of new members. They're settling more international trade in yuan instead of dollars. They're constructing a financial architecture that doesn't need the United States at the center. So follow the logic with me. And I mean really follow it, because this is the thread that nobody is pulling. China floods America with cheap goods. American consumers buy those goods on credit cards they can't afford to pay off. That credit card debt gets bundled and securitized into asset-backed securities held by American banks and investors. Those same banks use deposits and reserves to buy U.S. Treasury bonds, many of which are the exact bonds that China is selling. The U.S. government takes that money and uses it to pay interest on a national debt that now exceeds $35 trillion. And the interest payments alone now cost more than the entire defense budget. China is simultaneously fueling American consumer addiction and undermining the financial infrastructure that supports it. They are selling you the product, financing your dependency on debt to buy that product, and then quietly exiting the system that holds all that debt together. They are selling you the rope. And I don't use that metaphor casually. This is not an accident. This is not a coincidence of market forces. The Chinese government operates on 50-year strategic plans. They publish them. You can read them. They are telling you what they're doing. We're just not listening because we're too busy scrolling through Temu looking for a deal on a phone case. Type the word China in the comments if you had absolutely no idea this connection existed, because I need to know how many people are seeing this pattern for the first time, and I need you to share this video with one person. Just one. Someone who carries credit card debt and doesn't understand why it feels impossible to get ahead. Because it's not their fault. The game is rigged at a level most people never see. The credit card crisis is not a personal responsibility problem. I need that to land. The mainstream narrative, the one pushed by banks, by politicians, by financial media, is that Americans are irresponsible. They spend too much. They need to budget. They need to cut back on lattes and avocado toast. And look, personal financial discipline matters. Nobody's arguing otherwise. But when 175 million Americans carry credit card balances, nearly half the entire adult population of the country, that is not a character flaw. That is a systemic failure. You do not blame 175 million fish for the quality of the water. You test the water. Here's what's actually happening at the structural level. And this is what nobody will say on television because it indicts the entire model. The American economy has been fundamentally redesigned over the past 40 years to run on consumer debt instead of consumer income. Real wages, meaning wages adjusted for actual inflation, not the government's massaged version, for the bottom 60% of American workers have been essentially flat since 1971. That was the year we abandoned the gold standard, not a coincidence. Meanwhile, the cost of the three most important things in your life, housing, healthcare, and education, has increased by over 1,500% in that same period. 1,500%. The gap between what you earn and what life costs has been steadily widening for half a century, and it's been filled by one thing and one thing only: debt. First it was mortgage debt, borrow to own a home because you couldn't save fast enough. Then student loan debt, borrow to get educated because you couldn't work your way through school anymore. Then auto loan debt, borrow to get a car because public transit was gutted and you need wheels to get to work. And now, the final frontier, the last domino, credit card debt. Borrow for everything else: groceries, gas, doctor visits, the electric bill. Credit cards are the last buffer between the American middle class and financial freefall. And when that buffer maxes out, when there's no more available credit, no more minimum payments to make, no more balance transfers to execute, there is nothing left. No more cushion, no more pretending. And the delinquency data is telling us that for millions of Americans, that moment has arrived. So here's what I want you to do. And I'm going to be specific because I don't believe in vague advice. Vague advice is what people give when they don't actually understand the problem. First, if you carry a credit card balance, pick up your phone today and call the number on the back of the card. Ask for the retention department, not customer service, retention. Tell them you've received a lower rate offer from a competitor and you're considering transferring your balance. Ask them to reduce your APR. According to a study by LendingTree, 76% of people who asked for a lower rate received one. 76%. It takes 8 minutes. Most people have never done it because they didn't know they could. You can. Do it today. Second, if you have good credit, a score above 700, look into transferring high-interest balances to a card offering 0% introductory APR on balance transfers. Not so you can spend more, so you can create a runway, 12 to 21 months depending on the card, where every dollar you pay goes toward the actual principal instead of being devoured by interest. I'll put some options in the description. None of them are sponsors. I just want you to have the information. Third, build a 30-day emergency buffer, not 3 months, not 6 months. I know what the conventional wisdom says, but if you're drowning in credit card debt, telling you to save 6 months of expenses is like telling someone who's lost in the desert to build a swimming pool. Start with 30 days. 30 days of essential expenses, rent, food, transportation, utilities, sitting in a high-yield savings account earning 4 to 5% instead of 0.01% at your big bank. That small cushion is the difference between handling an unexpected expense with cash and putting it on the card and starting the cycle all over again. Fourth, and this one is for the investors watching, reduce your portfolio exposure to consumer discretionary stocks, retail, restaurants, travel and leisure, entertainment. These are the sectors that depend entirely on the American consumer having money to spend. And the data we just walked through tells you that spending is increasingly being financed by debt that is increasingly not being repaid. When this credit card bubble corrects, and it will correct because math always wins, consumer discretionary gets hit first and hardest, every time, without exception. Quick but important note, I'm not a licensed financial advisor. Everything in this video is education and analysis, not personal financial advice. Do your own research. Talk to a professional who knows your specific situation. I'm giving you frameworks and data. The decisions are yours. If you made it to this point in the video, you are genuinely in the top fraction of financially literate Americans. I mean that. Most people won't watch a 12-minute deep dive into credit card economics and Chinese Treasury strategy. They'll watch the 30-second version on TikTok. They'll skim a headline. They'll move on. You didn't. You stayed for the data. You stayed for the China thread. You stayed because you understand that the difference between people who get blindsided by financial crises and people who navigate through them is information. And you just armed yourself with information that most financial advisors charging $500 an hour don't have. That tells me everything I need to know about you, and it tells me you belong here. Subscribe. Hit the notification bell. We publish every Tuesday and Thursday. And I need to tell you about Thursday's video because it connects directly to everything we covered today. Thursday, we're releasing our investigation into the auto loan market, and what we found is going to disturb you. The subprime auto lending market right now, the structure of the loans, the delinquency patterns, the securitization practices, looks virtually identical to the subprime mortgage market in 2006, 2 years before the crash. The parallels are so precise that when we laid the charts on top of each other, our researcher actually said out loud, "Are we sure these are different data sets?" That video drops Thursday. You do not want to miss it. And one more thing. Comment the word insider below this video. I read every single comment and I reply to every person who writes that word. It tells me you watched the whole way through, and it tells me you're serious about understanding what's happening. And when you comment, tell me your credit card APR. I want to build a real-time data set from this community, because I trust the numbers I get from you more than the averages the Federal Reserve publishes. Your lived experience is data, and it matters. Let me leave you with this. 3 things to carry with you from today. 1. $1.14 trillion in credit card debt at 23% interest is not a sign of consumer strength. It is a sign of consumer desperation dressed up in spending data. The economy isn't growing, it's being financed, and financed growth has an expiration date. 2. The wage illusion. Your paycheck went up, but your life got more expensive faster. The gap between income and reality is being bridged by Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover. That bridge is made of debt, and the toll is 23 cents on every dollar. That is not sustainable. It is a countdown. 3. China is playing a game that operates on a timescale most Americans don't think in. They're flooding us with cheap goods that fuel credit card spending. They're dumping the Treasury bonds that backstop our financial system. They're stockpiling gold while we stockpile debt. The architecture of this crisis is not just domestic, it is global, and it is deliberate. You know what the scariest part of 2008 was? It wasn't the crash itself. Crashes are violent, but they're fast. The scariest part was the 6 months before the crash, when every person in a position of power and authority stood behind a microphone and said the fundamentals are strong, the consumer is resilient, the system is sound. Those exact words, the fundamentals are strong, the consumer is resilient, the system is sound, are being spoken right now. by the same types of people, in the same types of suits, on the same networks, with the same confidence. I don't know the exact date this breaks. Nobody does. And anyone who tells you they do is selling something. But the math tells me it breaks. The data tells me it breaks. The historical pattern tells me it breaks. And when it does, the only thing that separates the people who get crushed from the people who come through it stronger is whether they saw it coming and whether they prepared. That's why this channel exists. Not to scare you. Fear is useless. Fear makes you freeze. But ignorance is worse. Ignorance makes you a target. Every person who got financially destroyed in 2008 wasn't stupid. They were uninformed. They trusted the system to protect them, and the system protected itself. Don't be uninformed. Not this time. Not again. Stay sharp. Stay liquid. Reduce your exposure. And I'll see you Thursday.